Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwatham and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to read through the abridged version of one of our forefathers, just going into King Hezekiah's story. You know, in more detail, you can find his story in 2 Kings. I believe it's the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th chapter, right? And you see his, you know, his conduct. You know, and you know, just for the, you know, just not to make the lesson too long, you know, I kind of wanted to read through the abridged version of, you know, of his story found in the Apocrypha, right, and essentially just extrapolate a lot of the nuggets, you know, especially the, you know, the importance of prayer, you know, because, you know, there's so much going on, you know. Now you have, you know, something that's supposedly being discussed, you know, for June 14th, which so happens to be, you know, Donald Trump's birthday, right? You know, you have, I think it was the state, the crybaby state, you know, they're making their attacks on Israel, not Israel. I'm sorry, it was Iran. You know, then you have a lot of civil unrest, you know, Egyptian against Egyptian, and you have a lot of people who are essentially experiencing a lot of buyer's remorse, you know. You know, basically, when I say buyer's remorse, is normally a term that it explains when people essentially put their, you know, hopes into something, and they think, you know, this is going to actually bring them a good value, but then they realize after investing in this particular product, they realize that it's not as beneficial for them. So now you have a lot of disgruntled people, you know, within, you know, the American society. You know, for example, you have a lot of farmers being disgruntled. You have a lot of people who have been suffering from not so-called, but immigration policies, you know, because of, you know, their president. And as the scriptures say, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked bears rule, the people mourn. And that's exactly the sentiment that has constantly been echoing ever since, even before Trump's presidency, but it hasn't even been, you know, that long, right? So to make a long story short, you know, I kind of wanted to read through, you know, this abridged version of King Hezekiah, you know, because the things that are written aforetime are written for our learning, right? So I want to start off here in Ecclesiasticus chapter 48, you know, verse 17, and it says, as Hezekiah fortified his city and brought in water into the midst thereof, and digged the hard rock with iron, and made wells for waters. All right, let me just give me 1 second. Turn up the window here. It says, verse 18, and it says, in his time, Sennacherib came up and sent Rabshakeh, and lifted up his hand against Zion, and boasted proudly. Then trembled their hearts and hands, and they were in pain as women in travail. But they called upon the Lord, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Shai, which is merciful, and stretched out their hands toward him. And immediately the Holy One of Israel heard them out of heaven, and delivered them by the ministry of, it says Isai, but it's actually referring to Isaiah, right? So Isaiah was the prophet, during the reign of King Hezekiah, right? But going back to the point in regards to Sennacherib, because he was boasting, he had a very, very boastful attitude, about his so-called accomplishments, and the scriptures talk about that when it comes to, don't let not a rich man boast in his riches, and let not a mighty man boast in his might. Let if any man boasted, let him boast in understanding that he knoweth the Heavenly Father, Yahweh Bashmel Shai, right? I'm kind of quoting a couple of the precepts because I just have my Apocrypha at the moment. But, I want to make, hopefully, this lesson is as edifying as I can, as possible, right? But it shows that when you extrapolate, even though, Sennacherib was a king, over the Assyrians, essentially America and Trump have the same attitude. They have the same, that boastful attitude that is essentially rubbing a lot of these other nations the wrong way, right? And then a lot of the things that Trump is claiming and is actually doing through his unrighteous decrees, he's putting a lot of hell upon our people. The scriptures talk about how the children of Israel and the children of Judah would be oppressed together, in pursuant to Jeremiah the 50th chapter, right? So America would be that place where you would see both of those kingdoms. They're being reunited, but they're being oppressed, and you see that playing out through these different these immigration policies. That's what's going on. Trump is essentially, he's as the scriptures say, O Assyrian, the rod of my anger. I've sent you to be unto a hypocritical nation, to roughly paraphrase, right? They're being used to be as a whipping stick, to punish our people, right? But for us, that have this understanding, that hope to, be covered in the midst of all this trouble, in the midst of Jacob's trouble, we want to stay prayed up. Like, this is what I'm kind of getting into. One of the things that Hezekiah did, right, during his time of trouble, because when you think about, our people, a lot of them are in the state of mirth. A lot of them are, they don't consider all these things that is taking place upon the planet Earth is being done and being brought forth by the Heavenly Father, right? Like it says in Amos, I think it's the 3rd chapter, shall there be evil in the city and the Lord hath not done it, to roughly paraphrase. Our people don't consider these things. Even the animals, and we were going into this last week, not to make a long-winded topic, but even the animals, for example, such as bears and other animals that hibernate for the winter, they have an understanding that I need to overeat, so to speak, to store up enough fat, enough for the winter time, right? So they have an understanding, soon is going to be a point where there is scarcity of food, a scarcity of supplies, daily necessities. So they make certain preparations before that scarcity time comes, right? And that's pretty much, the same thing that, what we're doing, because we know that there's going to be a scarcity, of supplies, and we want the Lord to remember us and cover us and, feed us in those times of trouble, right? So, this is verse 21. And he says, and he smote the host of the Assyrians, and his angel destroyed them, right? And it says, for Hezekiah had done the thing that pleased the Lord, and was strong in the ways of David his father, and as Isaiah the prophet, who was great and faithful in his vision, had commanded him, right? So then eventually there was, if you go into Second Kings, at the end of the 19th chapter, there, an angel of the Lord took out, the Assyrian army, and in essentially, Sennacherib, I believe he went back to, I believe it was Nineveh, if I'm not mistaken, right? He went back, and then he had vengeance acted. I believe it was his own sons that acted vengeance upon him, right? So you had, the Lord coming to his rescue in a time of trouble. So that's why I'm reading this, because it's things that are written aforetime are written for our learning, and we want the things, that happened to our forefathers. For example, King Hezekiah in this situation, we want the Lord to come and defend us because we're merely worms. We're sheep's. That's not correct. Sheep in the midst of wolves, right? So, we're taking and using this, applying this understanding that we may be illuminated and, be covered, of those times, to come, right? So, hold on. Let me go to, just bear with me, hold on. This is Sirach 35, verse 16, and it says, "He that serveth the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Shai, shall be accepted with favor, and his prayer shall reach unto the clouds. The prayer of the humble pierceth the clouds." And it's very interesting too, because a lot of our people, they don't have a humble spirit, because when you think about the what's it called, the aura that is given off of Babylon the Great, aka America, the aura is it's a stench, and it's a stench of pride. It's a stench of pride that they can do. Nobody can do no wrong. Nobody has no faults. It's a stench of justifying wickedness. That is the mindset and the mentality of a lot of these people. Because that vibration rubs off on our own people also. That's why you can't correct them. They're very stubborn. They're rebellious. They can't look at themselves. When you go into the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, it was the Pharisee that had a mindset of, I fast twice a week. Damn, how does it go? I pray X amount of times, to roughly paraphrase, right? He had a mindset of essentially boasting in his so-called righteousness, right? He had that type of mindset. But if you contrast his mindset versus the mindset of the publican, he had more of a contrite mindset, humble. He said, "Lord, have mercy upon me, because I'm a sinner," right? Nehemiah did the same thing too, right? "I and my fathers have sinned," to roughly paraphrase. Yahweh Shai said, "Why callest thou me good? There's no one but good but the Father," to roughly paraphrase, right? And so you see different examples of our forefathers exemplifying humility, right? The humility, that the Lord had favor upon them, right? And the scriptures, I'll read it again here. Sirach 35, verse 17, and it says, "And the prayer of the humble pierceth the clouds, till it come nigh. He will not be comforted, and will not depart, till the Most High Yahweh Bashem Shai shall behold to judge righteously," and let's bear with me on this, "execute judgment." Okay, so let me go back to the remainder of Hezekiah's story here. So this is Sirach 48. I'll read verse 22 again, and I'll read down. And it says, For Hezekiah had done the thing that pleased the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, and was strong in the ways of David his father, as Isaiah the prophet, who was great and faithful in his vision, and commanded him. In his time the sun went backward and lengthened the king's life, right? So, he even got sick, and that's another thing also. He got sick and he prayed to the Lord also. And the Lord extended his life, 15 years, right? So our people don't understand the how valuable it is to actually be nigh unto Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. They're more quick to scoff, right? They're more quick to, worship their money. They're more quick to, speak all kinds of manners of evil things, right? The scriptures say that a skillful man heareth the word, but one that has no other understanding, he kind of casts it behind his back, right? Our people don't actually take the actual time to understand. They're quick to run their mouth, right? And that mouth, is death and life, like lieth in the power of the tongue, right? So that a lot of people are going to type their type away their judgment to essentially to death, right? So just bear with me. And it says verse 24, and it says, and he saw by an excellent spirit what should come to pass at last, and be comforted them that mourned in Zion. And he showed what should come to pass forever, the secret things of or ever they came. Right, so that's pretty much the point, because the next chapter, it goes into, King Josiah, another righteous king, right? But I kind of wanted to read this story to kind of talk about the importance of prayer, remembering, what the Lord did for him, because we're in a situation where, we need a savior, we need intervention, we need protection in these times, right? If I may say personally, I don't leave my house, without praying. Before I leave my house and before I go to the plantation, I always make sure I say a prayer, right? Keep that communication close, right? But I guess I'll end off with this last one here. This is Sirach 51 and 10, and it says, I called upon the Lord, the Father of my Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, that he would not leave me in the days of my trouble, right? So you see all types of trouble, going on, man. You see all these prophecies, like I mentioned earlier, the crybaby state, they're making moves and trying to aggravate, Iran, which is all part of prophecy anyway, because Iran is going to be guarded by, Russia, pursuant to Ezekiel 38. Iran is one of those big key players in that chapter, right? So you see all these, prophecies going on, and you see essentially what, as Yahushua said, the love of many waxing cold, right? You start to see, as things get a lot more difficult, you start to also see a strong distaste for the politicians. A lot of people don't like, the face of who's actually governing them, right? As things become more difficult, people will start to take matters into their own hands. So there's a lot of trouble, everywhere like in all facets and all avenues, you know. So, personally for me, pray before you leave your house, man. Seriously, because it's as things get more tough, you see a lot of these people are on thin ice, man, and it's like a little feather can break a camel's back, basically. A feather can break a camel's back. That's how tense, the air is. So anyways, let me just finish this here. Sirach 51:10, continuing on, and it says, in the time of the proud, when there was no help, right? So, we just need Yahushua, man, because this place, man, there's too much, there's trouble on every side, So, hopefully this lesson was edifying. Just wanted to make a quick one, but, just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.